endear myself to the organizers and to this august audience is I'll try and actually crunch down the presentation into perhaps half the time allotted, and then I'd be glad to take questions or even hear from you in terms of your perspective. Now, as we know, private label often times is tied into how we describe modern trade in India, because the progress of the two are intertwined. Having said that, I think as we go through the presentation, you'll realize that though we discuss private label in a contemporary context to be interlinked with modern trade, we've always known private label in some form or the other, and I'll touch on that. But before we do, let me just give you Nielsen's view of shoppers and shopping itself, and that might help set the context. There you have it. I think we see, as Nielsen see, success at modern trade and therefore at private label integral to winning with the Indian shopper. And for both retailers as well as manufacturers who hope to do that, we see private label as a very important tactic in that game. For those who've already seen private label in some form or the other, you'll realize that what you look at when you classify private label within the modern trade environment, essentially brands that are not nationally advertised, could be one way of describing them. You will realize that the ancestor of the private label is something that we're quite familiar with. So if you look at past times where you had slightly more evolved kirana stores, right, you would typically see snacks or ready-to-eat food items packaged hygienically, either branded or with a generic brand that you don't see advertised in mass media. They're ready for consumption and people actually flocking to it as part of their daily shopping repertoire. So in some sense, we've always been very familiar with private label, though we didn't actually have the term private label in our lexicon, right? And in a more contemporary context, what gives rise to private label, according to us, is this whole unstoppable force of inflation or an inflationary environment, and the immovable object that is the Indian shopper's aspiration for better hygiene, greater reassurance, better quality products. And when you have those two things intersect and collide inexorably time and time again, you typically see in markets both developing and developed the rise of private label, both in presence as well as proportion.